Hello everyone, welcome to the first Spotlight in January 2026. And time flies, and wow, what a last couple days, so that we have really interesting stuff to talk with you about today. About my cold, remember I was coughing in the last few Spotlights. It turns out I had pneumonia of all things. Now, let me explain. It's my own fault. I accept it. It was my own fault. I went surfing in really cold water. I mean, it was really cold water. I was the only one in the water. Nobody else. I had a wetsuit, but like nobody else got in the water. I was out there, but that's the bad news. The good news is I had so much fun. It was just so great, but I got really cold. Anyway, right after that, I got a cold. And then there was so much stuff we were doing at Farsight, I just kept working right through the cold till 5 in the morning like I always do. Just push till we got everything done. And I never gave myself enough rest, and then it finally pushed into pneumonia. And then I had to take antibiotics, and I'm better now. Well, I'm not completely better. I still have a cough, but the pneumonia part, the infection part is gone, but it takes a little while for the body to sort of readjust and the cough to go away and stuff like that. But I appreciate so much everybody hanging in there with me and not complaining about me coughing for the last couple Spotlights. I had pneumonia. I had no idea. Okay, but anyway, today is really interesting. Today we are talking about Venezuela, and wow, is Venezuela on the news. And it's so great because we have stuff to report to you that's amazing. Before I do that, though, let me give you some reminders, okay? As you know, we've turned into Farsight 3.0. Look, friends, it took us a lot to create Farsight. We had to first master the remote viewing process itself. That was no small deal. Then we had to master how to present remote viewing ourselves. And we started out with whiteboards, and then we went to light boards, and then we went to green screen, and then we went to animation and other things, and presentations in front of a camera. And so we went to all types of stuff, and that was quite a thing. In the meantime, we had to get 2 studios. Because we couldn't house everything. So in order for us to do this, and we had to buy cameras, lots of cameras, and we couldn't get cheap cameras. We had to get good cameras. So all of this stuff was like seemingly incredibly, if I had thought about it, 20 years ago, I would have said it's impossible, but we did it. But then the biggest hurdle was we had to learn how to use the software in order to do the latest stuff, Farsight 3.0, which is the animation stuff. That means we had to master Unreal Engine. Turned out that Unreal Engine wasn't as useful as we thought it was going to be. It's got some limitations in it and so on. And it's still a great thing for like world building for people who use it for games, like creating games and stuff like that. But for our use, it was not so good. But we had to learn it really deeply in order to figure that out. And then we had to learn the Reallusion software, iClone and Character Creator 5, iClone 8, and I had used that long ago when we had done the animated news series, Galactic Times Earth Report, which was a lot of fun. It's still available on YouTube, but the reason is iClone has advanced a lot, and Character Creator 5, which is the making of creations, animation, characters that you're animating, that advanced a lot too. We had to learn that pipeline as well, and this type of software is not easy. It's not easy. So in addition to getting all of the physical stuff and the studios and everything, and then we had to get mocap suits, motion capture suits. We used the ones by Rococo, and that was a big thing as well, learning how to use those. And they have software that goes with it. Anyway, there was so much stuff we had to learn, and of course video editing software. Well, all that stuff took us a long while and a lot of time, effort, money, resources, everything to get to where we are now. But here we are. And we have had some projects that we've started releasing now that we're into the full throttle of Farsight 3.0, which is using full animation and full graphics and a full everything to make these remote viewing presentations really interesting. Give you a couple things. We just released some days ago Lunar Infrastructure with Kamaya, and that is a blast. Everything is on farsightprime.com. A couple things are on YouTube, but most everything is on farsightprime.com. And again, that's our streaming service, and YouTube is highly censors things, and Google censors things, YouTube censors things. We just can't survive on YouTube. And so to do what we do, we have a monthly expense of about $30,000 a month. And YouTube, on the best of months, we get about $200 to $400. It just couldn't cover anything. So we have to have our own streaming service. And a lot of people on YouTube are struggling because they just can't get enough to pay for their bills to do this type of stuff. There are a couple big YouTube creators that have like millions of followers, and they do quite well. But for everybody else, they're trying to do things like Patreon and other things in order just to pay the bills to do these things. Anyway, I don't take any money from Farsight, but everybody else has to be paid to do this stuff because this is what they do for a living. And then the studio rent and everything else and all the cameras, that costs money. And so we have FarsightPrime.com, and also we're able to make FarsightPrime.com, which is run by Vimeo, into the best streaming service possible. Like it's a totally equivalent or better than Disney, Paramount Plus, Hulu, Netflix, whatever the streaming services are. So we completely control it, and it has all of our content, just our content. So Lunar Infrastructure with Kamaya. You got to see it. It's a riot. It's got a lot of these things are extremely humorous. They're great things and fun to watch. Now, it was with Kamaya and Intisam. So it was the Lunar Infrastructure with Kamaya and Intisam. So we're trying to group sessions together so that we have like these projects again that have like more than one viewer when possible. So now the one with Kamaya and Intisam is interesting because Intisam used the presentational approach where she's talking in front of a camera, but with all types of graphics associated with it. And Kamaya used Lightboard with all types of graphics associated with it. It's really interesting to watch it. And the graphics, and at the end there's humor. I mean, it's just fun to watch. Aziz presented it, and Aziz actually is the editor for a couple of with a lot of these things, because he was the one that sort of mastered how to do that style of editing. And then before that, we had a dominant military presence in Antarctica with the MA. And so that was with animation software, where we had an avatar doing things, and we just now published that one as well. That was the dominant military infrastructure in Antarctica, and that's one of the biggest hits also. Okay, and before that we had 3i Atlas. And we're going to mention a little bit about that because 3i Atlas is big in the news because it's that asteroid or comet that is still going through the solar system. And we have good predictions about that something's going to happen to that. And then we had also the Mars infrastructure with Intisam. Now understand, when these new projects come out with Farsight 3.0, they look really fun to watch. And people really are enjoying them. But you have to understand the remote viewing is serious. It's really serious. And so it's authentic remote viewing, all done under the totally blind, scientifically defensible conditions that we've always used here at Farsight. But we made it more interesting to watch and listen to and so on. So with regard to, for example, the lunar infrastructure, we have long had projects and shown about the American secret space program, which really does exist. They even have congressional hearings talking about these types of things, sometimes public, like with David Grush talking about the UFO crash retrieval program. Well, how do you think those UFOs get shot down? Well, there's an American secret space program, and there's a long story behind that. I'm not going to go into it right now, but I have talked about that in the past. Well, Americans also have a base on the moon, and they have a base also on Mars. And that's because the secret space program, which is the last thing anybody in the government wants to be, releasing to the public, that's also there. So they have some of the ET technology from the crashed ships to produce ships that can go to the moon and can go to the Mars really quickly, not like with SpaceX rockets taking months. We're talking about something that can get there in half an hour, things like that. So, And so this infrastructure, we sort of say, well, you should know about it as well. Remember, everybody has their own intelligence service. There's Mossad, there's CIA, there's FBI, there's MI6. Everybody's got some type of intelligence, but where's your intelligence? Hey, Farsight's it. We're the ones that bring the public the open source intelligence so that you can have your own intelligence agency as well. This is the stuff that they don't want you to know, but hey, you've got your own intelligence service. So anyway, so check out some of these recent projects, a whole bunch of them actually, at farsightprime.com. All of our new stuff is coming out with this new style of presentation. Okay, now let's jump into Venezuela, because that's the thing that's really big on the news, and that's what everybody's wanting to hear about. Let me just check the turnout. Boy, the turnout's really great for this early. This is great. Okay, so let's just talk about this. We're talking about remote viewing, and we're talking about prediction, and we're talking about AI, and we're talking about the failure of conventional political science. That's right, that's what we're talking about. Now, I actually work in a department of political science in a leading university on this planet, and so I have to talk about what sort of the stuff in the home turf. What goes wrong with political science, and why is that sort of relevant to looking at Venezuela and other things? Well, this discussion that I'm going to have with you today is really not about Venezuela alone. Venezuela is what we call a case study. It's a real-world example that allows us to examine something much larger. And so what is that thing that's much larger? It's how humans attempt to understand the future and why those attempts usually fail, and how new methodologies such as remote viewing and the use of AI change what is possible. Now, Maduro, former president of Venezuela, has already been captured and is now imprisoned in New York. And that fact alone tells us something important right at the outset, which is events can move faster than the mainstream analysis can adapt. So when events happen, boom, things continue and continue and continue until they don't, and suddenly something new is there. So whatever resistance remains inside Venezuela now is not Maduro-led, rather it's structural, it's ideological, it's institutional, and it's possibly popular, but it is no longer centralized in a single leader. So that distinction matters, and it fits the remote viewing data very clearly. Now, every project has a target. So our targets on Venezuela, we have 2 sessions that we published before, and that was one with Aziz and another one with Kamaya. So let's actually talk about those 2 sessions. The target goal. What was the actual target goal? Well, we had a target goal, which was to determine the future of the upcoming conflict between the United States and Venezuela, specifically focusing on the pinnacle of U.S. engagement. Now, the focus had 2. There was one major focus, and that was the most overt and maximum engagement of the United States in Venezuela across the next 4 years, starting in September 2025. Now, there was an event Z that we looked at, which was the largest military operation taken by the United States against Venezuela across the next 4 years. And then we also had subject F that we looked at, which was Nicolas Maduro, and we had subject R, which was Donald Trump. And we had some other things we looked at and relating to certain concerns and stuff. And it's in the actual sessions, which are available for you to see, both on farsightprime.com, and I think a few of them, maybe 1 or 2 of them, is also up on YouTube. Now, what did we know before the events happened, before the capture of President Maduro? What did we know from the remote viewing data themselves, just by themselves? This is before this last week. So the Venezuela deep news sessions were conducted, analyzed, and published well before these events over the last week. At the time that we published them, which was back in October, November, we did not know that there would even be a conflict. We never knew if the United States would actually do anything. We did not know when anything might happen, and we did not know who would still be in power when the events peaked. We didn't know all that stuff. What we did have was blind remote viewing data, multiple independent viewers, and we had convergence on specific patterns. Now, that is what makes this project valuable. It's not hindsight reconstruction. It's not looking, well, okay, this is how we did it. We see it now based on what we're seeing in the news. No. It's not looking back and sort of making things fit. It's not hindsight reconstruction. It's prediction under uncertainty. And it's followed by post-event evaluation. Now, what the sessions actually showed, reframed with now that we know that that Maduro has gone. Now that Maduro is gone, something becomes clearer in the data. The sessions were never really about Maduro as a person. They were about military occupation, civilian suppression, urban control, ideological resistance, and leadership pressure dynamics. Now, Maduro himself, he functioned in the sessions as a node or a symbol, a managerial mindset. With him removed, the data still hold because the system remains. The system remains. This is exactly what good predictive data should do. Remain meaningful even as the surface details change. So the core insight is that the remote viewing data does not predict the headlines. Remote viewing data does not give you dates. It does not give you press releases. It does not give you slogans, and it does not give you election outcomes. Remote viewing gives you structures, pressures, patterns. It gives you psychological stress, psychological states, and it gives you the constraints. It shows you what must happen, not what will be announced. And this is why predictive remote viewing often looks vague to people trained in journalistic or academic traditions, but it looks extremely precise after the events unfold. So let's talk about why the normal ways that people use, especially in academia, to predict things fail. So why do conventional statistics and political models fail? This is where the Venezuela case becomes important beyond remote viewing. See, in traditional political science, it relies on historical analogies. It assumes the institutional continuity, that governments will continue. It assumes privileged elite discourse among presidents and among academics themselves. And it assumes a focus on belief systems, and it avoids at all costs low probability, high impact outcomes. So, low probability, high impact outcomes are the big ones, and those are the ones that it misses. So as a result, the political scientists routinely fail to predict major political ruptures. Let me give you some examples. Let's talk about the Shah of Iran. Now, the Shah of Iran, he fell back in the old Jimmy Carter days when Jimmy Carter was president. Now, political scientists totally missed it. They totally missed it. Political scientists focused on, actually there was one political scientist named Jim Bill. It sounds like two first names, but it's that Jim was his first name, Bill was his last. And he was a political scientist at the University of Texas in Austin. He was like the sole dissenter. He was the only one who was saying, this guy's going to collapse. Everybody else was saying, it's the Rock of Gibraltar. The Shah is there. They even convinced Jimmy Carter to go to Iran and to stand there with the Shah side by side and say, we're bonded forever and Iran is going to be helping us predict the oil routes and everything like that. 2 weeks later, the Shah was running for his life. I mean, political scientists missed it totally. They were focused on Tehran, the capital. They were focused on the military and the Shah's control of the military. And they were totally ignoring rural networks. Iran's a big country. And they were ignoring not only the rural networks, but what was going on in those rural networks. So there was some guy who they weren't focusing on called the Ayatollah Khomeini, and he was in Paris in exile, and he was producing talks. And these talks he was putting on cassette tapes. This is, for those who are younger, those are spinning things that they... Anyway, they were cassette tapes. He was producing and reproducing cassette tapes, and those cassette tapes were being distributed to the mosques all throughout rural Iran. Everybody was listening to the Ayatollah Khomeini, except the people in Tehran. And so the academics were ignoring all of that, and they were ignoring the nonlinear spread of ideological momentum. Well, let's talk about another example, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union. Now, the political scientists simply missed it. I mean, they missed it. The collapse of the whole Soviet Union. I mean, they didn't sort of think about it was even possible until like a week or 10 days before it happened. Political scientists simply could not believe, they could not imagine something that large, something that entrenched, something that ideologically dominant could collapse so quickly. Their disbelief became their blind spot. Well, let's talk about the collapse of Somalia. As you know, Somalia is contested sovereignty. It's really a mess. But back in the old days, there was a government in Somalia, and political scientists failed completely to predict the collapse of that government. And all the problems that you see now in Somalia are a result of the collapse of the government. And the political scientists around the world, they totally missed it. They ignored environmental collapse. There was a drought. The water tables were shrinking. There were no resources. The government couldn't hold on to, ruling the people when they couldn't even drink. I mean, it was an environmental collapse. And then there was ecological stress and resource exhaustion. And the political scientists weren't even looking at that. I have to say that the CIA, which got a lot of information, a lot of guidance from political scientists, started after the collapse of Somalia to collect a huge ton of environmental data. That was a big pivot point for the CIA. They said, oops, we don't care what the political scientists say, we've got to start looking at water tables and all types of other environmental stuff around the world to be able to predict this type of thing. So the political scientists treated governance as detached from physical reality until the state collapsed entirely. Now, what good is that? All right. And these are not minor errors, folks. These are big things. And there are catastrophic analytical failures. And things are no better now. You say, well, things must be better now. Well, look at the big one on the block. The biggest one of all is the entire extraterrestrial presence. There's been congressional hearings on the extraterrestrials. Congressional hearings, both public and private. We have people like David Grush, Lou Elizondo, and others, testifying in front of Congress, in front of cameras, people can see. And there's still not a single course taught in any major university on the ET presence. What? Okay, meaning the political scientists don't do anything that possibly could cause some problems in their careers. They're fear-based, risk-averse. So let's talk about why political science is vulnerable. Well, I'm going to pivot now and talk not just about the failures, but about what's coming next. Because Microsoft just came out with a major study. Yep. Over the holidays in December, they came out with a very interesting major study. And this Microsoft study was really interesting because they recently released a study identifying the first 40 jobs that are most at risk from AI. So people that could lose their jobs because of AI. Now, let me give you some examples. Fashion models, that was not too surprising because AI-generated art is so common these days. And, fashion models, who's going to hire a fashion model when an AI for free or just for a modest monthly fee can generate advertising material with great models in a blink of an eye? So why have a big shoot, pay photographers, videographers, and models, and everything like that, when you just sit at your computer, blink, 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 click, 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 and there you have your advertisement ready to go. So fashion models, they ranked 35. Of the top 40, fashion models were 35 in terms of risk for not getting work anymore. Political scientists, I'm not kidding, were 15. Out of the top 40 political scientists of all things. My eyes bugged out when I saw that. What? Political scientist. Matter, I work in a political science department at a major university, so I saw political scientists ranking 15. You know, I thought models would go before political scientists, but that's not what Microsoft said. And that ranking is not about automation of paperwork. No, it's about the failure of insight. The study implicitly acknowledges that political science is simply not producing reliable predictions. It is overly constrained by ideology and status quo thinking. It avoids disruptive conclusions, and it is deeply biased by academic risk aversion, which is why no one's talking about the ET UFO type of phenomena in the universities. AI, artificial intelligence, doesn't have any of these constraints. It's data-driven. So the fear barrier in academia is huge. Human academics operate under a very powerful constraint: fear. Fear of ridicule, fear of professional exclusion, you're not invited to things anymore, fear of funding loss, fear of reputational damage. These things are huge. People have their PhDs, and they hold on to those PhDs as the one thing that gives them credibility in life, and anything that could possibly attack their reputation, their credibility, they want to avoid at all costs. The result is that they avoid controversial methods. They avoid large scope predictions where they could be, afraid of predicting something that's wrong. And they focus on safe puzzles, especially safe puzzles in the past, where they're just trying to sort things out, but they're not trying to describe things in a way that can predict things for the future. And they publish incremental work that does not threaten the existing frameworks. So remote viewing, therefore, is radioactive in academia. Not because it lacks data, believe me, there's plenty of data, but because it violates the social norms. Now here at Farsight, all of our data, all of our projects, hundreds of projects, we have transcripts of every word spoken in those remote viewing data, in the remote viewing sessions, and that's just raw data. And we give those available for free for download from our website at farsight.org. And those are data sets. Those are perceptual data sets conducted under totally blind conditions that are scientifically defensible and totally squeaky clean. So no one can say that we do not offer ourselves up for scientific investigation. So the real issue is people are afraid to look at something that is that different. But the data are data, and they can be analyzed. So AI does not experience fear. It doesn't care. AI does not care whether a method is fashionable. It's not worried about reputational damage. It only cares whether the data improves the prediction. That's the only thing it cares about. And so the Microsoft study really fits into this. Microsoft is saying they think AI might be able to do things better than fear-based humans. So how does remote viewing fit into this? So remote viewing introduces something that political science fundamentally lacks, and that is non-local data acquisition. It does not replace conventional data. Conventional data, especially historical data, statistics, things like that, that's still there. Everything's there. Remote viewing expands or extends the conventional data. It doesn't replace anything. It extends what's there conventionally. Remote viewing captures information that is not yet visible. The numbers haven't come in yet, but it captures the perceptions of what's coming. It identifies emerging structures before they solidify. It detects psychological and systemic pressures early, and it operates outside of institutional blinders. So, when combined with AI, remote viewing data can be weighted. It can be compared It can be stress tested. And it can be integrated with physical, economic, military, and environmental data. It can be added to the entire collection of other types of data. This is not mystical. It's not goofy New Age stuff. It is methodologically pluralistic. So why is AI the bridge and not academia? Academia will not embrace remote viewing first. It's simply not going to go there. Physicists are not going to validate it anytime soon. Political scientists are not going to risk their careers on it. AI, however, artificial intelligence, will adopt it first because AI has absolutely no reputational anxiety. AI does not care about academic politics. AI can test the usefulness of the remote viewing data empirically, and AI can discard what fails and keep what works. Remote viewing does not need belief. It needs performance. Let's talk about Venezuela. It's a demonstration case. The Venezuela project shows how this works in practice. The sessions, the two remote viewing sessions, did not say that Maduro will be captured on X date. And they did not say that the United States will announce why. Or it did not predict the headlines. What it did predict, what the remote viewing data did predict was an urban military occupation, suppression of civilians, armored presence, airborne dominance, ideological resistance, and leadership under pressure. Those patterns are now visible, clear as day. And this is how predictive intelligence actually works. So what this means going forward, as disclosure pressure increases and global systems destabilize, predictive failure will become more costly. Blind spots will become more dangerous. Institutional thinking will lag reality. People are simply not going to listen to the normal stuff, standard stuff coming out of institutional thinking. And remote viewing combined with AI offers early warning, alternative perspectives, and systemic foresight. It's not certainty, and it's not prophecy, but it is preparedness. So, Venezuela is not about being right. It's about demonstrating how prediction actually works, why traditional methods fail, and why new methods are necessary. So remote viewing expands the data space. AI expands the analytical capability of using the remote viewing data, the analytical capacity. And together, remote viewing with AI challenge a field that has grown comfortable being wrong, as long as it is safely wrong. That, more than anything else, is why this matters. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the actual sessions themselves. Okay, so we'll start with Aziz's session, and let's just take a look at sort of what he finds. Okay, and then we'll go into Kamaya's sessions. So, in Aziz's session, we focus on the anatomy of the urban military occupation. Aziz's session unfolds in stages, and these stages really matter. He begins with blue hues and land-water interface, and it's followed by structures moving on water, and that's not an abstract symbol. It's a classic perceptual signature of naval or amphibious presence near land. And then he repeatedly perceives uniform subjects, organized movement, structures associated with water, and non-surface objects moving upward. And this establishes the operational theater clearly, and it's early, it's coastal, it's maritime, and it's militarized. So that's what we know going in. The session progresses. Aziz flash sketches sharpen things. He gets a uniform older male in matted green or dull green attire with headgear. really, it's very clear what he's looking at, under totally blind conditions, mind you. Indoor spaces with tables, papers, and formal posture, long, sleek, cylindrical objects on man-made surfaces, subjects moving through hallways and corridors. This is not battlefield chaos. This is command, planning, and institutional control. See, so when you see this stuff, you say, gosh, this is not just the whole country blowing up with a battlefield like World War II. Looking at the session, say, this what looks like it's coming is command, planning, institutional control. In terms of prediction, that's really important to know. Now later, Aziz moves into dense foliage, where multiple subjects in camo gear are crouched, they're hiding, holding long objects. He explicitly deducts the word camouflage. And this introduces a ground-level tactical layer, either guerrilla forces, special units, or resistance elements. And then Aziz reaches what we call in the target event Z, and the character of the data become really unmistakable. He perceives violent, crowded, chaotic environment resembling people being pushed and wrestled. He sees, immediately followed that, he gets contrasting perceptions of calm, spacious indoor control spaces, and then a perspective where a subject watches violence on a screen, like on a TV screen. And that contrast is crucial. It shows the separation between the decision makers and the consequences. So Aziz moves deeper into that perspective, and he sees large urban armored vehicles in urban environments, large armored vehicles, civilians crouching and fleeing and being restrained. He sees streets described as dirty, rough, scattered with debris. Soldiers line the roads carrying long man-made objects, and Aziz explicitly deduces that this looks like a military occupation. Right there in black and white, right there in live remote viewing. That is his own deduction, his own thoughts, not an interpretation imposed afterwards. This is before. And when he enters the mind of subject K in the target, and subject K, let me just bring that right back to the actual. There's a few actual target things you probably should be aware of in terms of the actual identities of things. And so subject K was, actually he was dealing with a couple subjects, and he renamed, there were two subjects he was going after, and that was Nicolas Maduro and Donald Trump. He was going after those two subjects. So don't worry about the names, the letters, but those are the two things. So when he enters the mind of subject K, which is a subject that he just found there. Now that was not Maduro, and it was not Trump. It was just a subject that he found there. He wanted the people that he was looking at, and so he had to call it by something, so he called it subject K. But remember, later on we cover Maduro and Trump. Subject K, the psychology became clear. Inside subject K's mind, which was just somebody he found there, it was a soldier, feels necessary. He feels it is his duty. It's not emotionally conflicted. Civilians are perceived as troublesome, and the force is seen as management, not cruelty. This is military policing psychology. It's not combat psychology, and to know that going in is hugely valuable on a predictive level. This is not World War II. This is military occupation. So Aziz then probes, well again this is subject F, but this is Maduro. And what emerges is not fear or desperation, but rather a belief that people are smaller, a belief that civilians must be managed by might, a belief that conviction that stability requires force, and a belief that emotional detachment from human suffering is valuable. That's how Aziz found Maduro thought. Finally, Aziz probed Donald Trump. And the contrast was stark. When he probed Donald Trump, that was a subject R, but we don't worry about the names right now, the labels. But he did not know he was probing Maduro or Trump when he did it. He just knew there was names there, subject R or some subject, the various letters. So, but when he probed Donald Trump, which I can tell you now, he felt worry. Donald Trump was worried. He felt pressure. He felt there was a sense of reluctance. Donald Trump didn't really want to do this. And there was a sense that events were being driven by others. And the metaphor of watching a pot heat up, hoping it does not boil over. This is not triumph. It's stress under constraint. Now, literally just before Maduro was captured, he had a meeting with some people from China, from the Chinese government, talking about new things that would happen with regard to coordination and economic activities and things like that. And that might have been the thing that triggered this to happen. It wasn't just that they were going to do it no matter what, but the fact that the Chinese were making inroads in dealing with Venezuela, Donald Trump could have said that just puts it beyond the line, because this is our territory. He would be thinking this is the Western Hemisphere, the Monroe Doctrine, that type of thing. And right after that, within hours, the operation actually started. Now, I understand that the operation was actually okayed around Christmas time, and then they were waiting for the weather to clear. But after the Chinese actually met with Maduro, Donald Trump probably said, that's the end, and it actually started. So this fits exactly with what Aziz's data said, that the events were being driven by others. That's what Aziz had in his session. Now let's pivot over to Kamaya's session, okay? And basically she could be summarized in her data as emotional and aerial dimension. So in Kamaya's session, it really complements Aziz's by filling in what it feels like to be inside the environment rather than how it's organized. So she begins with level land, many subjects, surface structures, heavy contrast between light and dark, and intense brightness adjacent to the structures. And almost immediately, she emphasizes energetics above the base surface. She repeatedly perceives movement in the sky, man-made sounds coming from above, circular airborne motion, smoke, haze, and energetic clouds. This strongly reinforces air dominance, surveillance, drones, or aerial operations. You can get all of this from the remote viewing data. That's what this type of thing is for. Now, Kamaya then consistently describes subjects emotionally heightened, nervousness, anxiety, fear, rapid movement toward and away from structures, and a sense of being watched. And then she identifies group Z, and this is one of the most important findings in either session. Now let me look up exactly what group Z is, just for you. So I want to make sure I tell you exactly how it was written in the target description. Now she doesn't know what group Z is, and she doesn't see the target description, but I can tell you about what that actually is now. And group Z. Is the actually it's event Z, which is the largest military operation taken by the United States. And in my notes here, I see here that she identified a group in that operation as Group Z. So she identified during that operation. She identified a Group Z, and then she found that Group Z was emotionally unified, ideologically aligned, protective, not chaotic, not driven by rage, resistant to persuasion, and functionally almost as a hive mind. This does not feel like a mob. This feels like ideological organization resistance. She notes that the group is educated, informed, deeply invested, and convinced that they are right. This is exactly the type of group that persists after the leadership is removed. So identifying the people in Venezuela and then looking at them as a group and saying that's Group Z, coming up with all that information about the mentality of Group Z, that's like really great. And then when Kamaya probes the leadership, which is subject F, and I believe for sure that would be Maduro himself. I should keep this target definition out so I can just grab it but I want to make sure I tell you. Yeah, subject F is Nicolas Maduro. Subject R is Trump. Okay. So when she probes the leadership, subject F, Maduro, she perceives him as an overseer, analytical, not emotionally invested, managing outcomes rather than participating directly, creating a new reality through force. That's how Maduro thought. And when she probes subject R, which is Donald Trump, the only thing she knew was subject R. The emotional tone shifted. She gets concern, personal investment, internal tension, very much parallel to the type of things that Aziz was picking up. And also outward confidence masking internal doubt. So if you look at this and compare it with Aziz's data, there's a lot of parallels here. And this independently mirrors Aziz's finding without overlap or queuing. This is great. So what these two sessions tell us together is Aziz's and Kamaya's sessions independently describe a large-scale urban military crackdown. Armored vehicles in the city streets, civilians that are being restrained, kneeling, fleeing, airborne activity dominate the environment, command and control separated from ground violence, ideological resistance that survives leadership removal, and leaders under pressure rather than in control. So this is not a speculative narrative. It's shared structure of the data. And that's what people need to see. What do the data say and what kind of structure is in those data? Critically, these data were collected blind. They were published at Farsight early. They did not rely on belief, and they did not assume any specific outcome. It described what the system would look like when the pressure peaked. That is why it remains relevant even now. So why this matters now? With Maduro already captured and removed, the sessions make more sense, not less sense. They were never really about Maduro the man. They were about what happens when the state enters military enforcement mode under external and internal pressure. The resistance described by Kamaya does not disappear with a leader. The occupation described by Aziz does not require a leader. This is exactly how political ruptures unfold. Now, what remote viewing data suggests that have not yet happened, but may be coming? So that's good. We can look at these sessions. We now see we've gotten to the point where Maduro was removed. What do these sessions say about what comes next? So now that we have seen what has happened, the real question becomes, what does the remote viewing data suggest we should be watching for? Because predictive remote viewing often shows processes, not endpoints. So we should be looking for prolonged urban military policing, not a clean exit. The data do not describe a quick resolution followed by withdrawal. It's not like everything's wrapped up and the United States gets out and all done. No. Aziz repeatedly perceived soldiers stationed in the cities, armored vehicles remaining present, civilians being restrained after the initial conflict. A policing mindset rather than a combat mindset. This is not World War II, it's a policing issue. And that suggests an extended security phase, continued checkpoints, patrols, civilian compliance enforcement. So what do you want to watch for? You want to watch for sustained military presence in the urban areas, normalization of curfews and or restrained movement, and language shifting from operation to security or stabilization. So let's talk about resistance that is leadership and that is leaderless. Resistance that is leaderless because Maduro's gone, and ideological. We can get some of that from Kamaya's session, where she looks at Group Z, the people in Venezuela itself. She was focusing like, what are these people thinking? Well, that group, the Venezuelans inside that group, was not emotionally dependent on a leader. They didn't depend on Maduro. That group did not feel chaotic, nor did it feel reactionary. It felt unified, informed, and it felt protective. It felt that it functioned as a collective entity. Now that implies that resistance that exists after Maduro is removed survives. So resistance survives Maduro's removal. It also implies decentralized opposition. Not like from a central source, it's going to be decentralized. And it also implies ideological persistence rather than command-driven rebellion. Ideological persistence. So what do you want to watch for? You want to watch for small but consistent resistance actions. You want to watch for non-hierarchical protests or disruption, not like coming from the top down, but non-hierarchical protests or disruption. And you want to look for narratives framing resistance as moral or existential, not personal loyalty. So, what else do we get from both of these sessions, Aziz's and Kamaya's, in terms of what should we be looking for? Basically, you get continued airborne surveillance and control. Kamaya, for example, repeatedly emphasized the movement above the base surface, man-made sounds overhead, energetic activity dominating the environment, and subjects feeling watched. This suggests that the surveillance does not stop when the fighting stops. It suggests that air dominance remains central to the control. And so what do you want to watch for? You want to watch for expanded drone presence, surveillance flights, and you want to watch for the persistent aerial monitoring justified as security. Okay, so let's talk about legal and symbolic trial-like events. So Kamaya, she repeatedly sensed the idea of watching, persecution, trial-like dynamics, subjects singled out and observed. So this may not mean literally just court trials only, although it certainly does include that, but it may also imply public legal proceedings, symbolic persecutions, high visibility accountability events, high visibility accountability events, and a narrative framing things in terms of justice and reckoning. So what do you want to watch for? You want to watch for televised legal actions, symbolic prosecutions of former officials, and messaging emphasizing the legitimacy through law, the legitimacy of everything they're doing by saying it's the law. So let's now look at the psychological strain on the external decision makers. Kamaya and Aziz, they both had impressions of Subject R. Now, Subject R is Donald Trump. The impressions were not victorious. They were pressured, worried, constrained, emotionally invested, but uneasy. This suggests ongoing stress at the leadership level, concern about escalation or backlash, fear of unintended consequences. So what do you want to watch for? Mixed messaging, cautious or defensive rhetoric. You want to watch for the emphasis on justification rather than celebration. This is not going to be one of those events like President George W. Bush landing on an aircraft carrier and saying, it's all finished. This is going to be something that's much more cerebral. The focus is going to be on justification for long-term stuff, not instant celebration. So expect a long transition rather than a new stable order. So neither session for Kamaya or Aziz describes peace, relief, enthusiasm, or rapid normalization. They just don't describe that. Instead, both remote viewers describe control, management, suppression, endurance. This suggests that Venezuela may enter a long transitional phase, not a clean post-conflict reset. So it's not like the conflict's over and then they get reset and it's all good. There's going to be a long transitional phase. What do you want to watch for? Slow institutional reconfiguration. Prolonged uncertainty. Competing narratives about legitimacy, what's right, what's wrong, and fatigue rather than resolution. So let's draw some key insights from this analysis. The most important takeaway from all of this is that the remote viewing data do not describe an ending. They describe what the system looks like when the pressure peaks, what lingers afterwards. So what we should expect next is not a dramatic climax, but a drawn-out period where power is enforced, resistance adapts, and the outcome remains unsettled. And friends, to be honest, that is how real history actually unfolds. Well, folks, that's what we do. We at Farsight collect real data that are not typically accepted by mainstream outlets or academia in any way, shape, or form, and we analyze it, and we get stuff like this. And this is stuff that we had months before the actual event started. Can't get this anywhere else, and you get the absolute best presentation of these types of data with all of our countless projects, hundreds, right here at Farsight. FarsightPrime.com is our major streaming service, and Farsight.org is our website where we have the transcripts and a whole bunch of other information. The streaming service is where you see the actual data, the actual videos for everything. All right, everybody, that's it. That's what I came to talk with you about today. Let's see how we're doing in terms of time. I covered a lot of information. We talked for exactly an hour, so let me check the chat to see how things are. We have a great turnout today. So, and the chat seems to be doing really lively and really great. So I want to thank everybody for being here. And this was a really perfect time for us to talk about the Venezuela thing. It happened right on cue. And this is a really great way, especially because we analyzed the Venezuela stuff before. And again, we didn't present the Venezuela stuff like in December because I wasn't sure when the thing was going to happen. But we did an analysis of the Venezuela stuff. And then now that the things have actually started, we can see how good our analysis was back then. It was really quite interesting, and we actually saw what we saw, and I just gave you the full analysis of what we get from the remote viewing data. Again, I want to remind everybody to watch the latest stuff that we have at FarsightPrime.com because this is Farsight 3.0, and these things are better than Star Wars. These are great. These things, I mean, the videos are really entertaining to watch, and but it's solid, absolutely solid remote viewing in it as well. Okay. All right, everybody. So I'm going to see you next week. A lot is happening in the world. As you know, we have talked about a lot of change. 2025 was a really rough year for everybody. And the only thing we can say is 2026 is going to be much worse. But you're okay because you're watching here, and we're the ones that are explaining things. And mainstream isn't going to explain anything till after it happens, and they're going to be caught flat-footed. But you're going to be knowing what's coming in advance and understanding how to interpret these data and so on. All right, everybody, I love you, and I'll see you again next week. All right, take care. See you in a week.